2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 14 is my text for tonight. It's a very simple statement that Paul made. Paul was writing to his protege by the name of Timothy, a young man, and he was a young preacher, a young evangelist. This is the last letter that Paul wrote, by the way. He was beheaded just shortly after this, according to general tradition. And here's what he says. But as for you, continue in what you have learned and have been convinced of, because you know those from whom you learned it. Short verse, very, very meaningful. Persistence. Continue. Keep on doing something. The man who undertakes a big project and sees it all the way through, we have a great deal of admiration for a person like that. But reminds me of a story that was told about by Benjamin Franklin. He told about a man back in the old days, old farm days. They sharpened their axe. They had a saddle, and a pump that they would pump this wheel around, and they'd sharpen the axe on that wheel. And this fellow had a very rusty axe head, just a very rusty axe head. And he says, I'm going to clean it up and make it shiny all over. And so he started off, and it was a pretty good job. And somebody was standing by and said, well, you're not making very good progress there. And he was just huffing and puffing, and finally he stopped, and he said, I'm not going any further. And this fellow said, well, instead of having a shiny axe head now, you've just got a speckled axe head. He said, well, the speckled axe head is okay. and that's kind of the way we think a lot of times about difficult projects. When barriers come up, when bad things happen to us, we find some excuse. We find some excuse for saying, well, that's okay. It works just as well this way as it would have another way. And so we lose a lot of the accomplishments of our lives because we're not persistent. We don't stick to it. I read quite some time ago, I read a story about an author by the name of Irving Stone. Irving Stone spent his life writing biographies of famous people, going all the way back to Michelangelo and some very, way back yonder, some very old stories. And he was a very successful writer, and somebody asked him, said, do you see a single strain that kind of moves through all these people who have been very, very successful? Maybe as artisans, maybe as professional people, maybe as lawyers or doctors or inventors or scientists or whatever. But is there anything that's kind of common to all of them? Here's what he said. He said, I write about people who, sometime in their life, have a vision or a dream of something that should be accomplished, and they go to work on it. They are beaten over the head, they're knocked down, they're vilified for years. Sometime they get somewhere. But every time they are knocked down, they come back. They stand up. You cannot destroy these people, he said. And at the end of their lives, they have accomplished some modest part of that which they set out to do. I really like that. I thought that was a fine quotation, because it says something about persistence. Keep doing what you set your mind to do. Goals are not things that we just wake up one morning and say, well, I want to be thus and so. I think I'll be something big. I'm going to be this or that or the other. and then, they go on about their work and they don't pay much attention to it. That's not really a goal. That's not a real objective. Goals and objectives have a noble character to them, or they should have. Something that lifts you above what you are. Something that challenges you. Something that challenges you all through your life. It isn't as if you said, well, I worked on this for about a week, and I just decided that's not for me. I can't do that. And so they jump over to something else. And, well, they work on that one for a month, but that one didn't work. And so they hippity-hop all over the place, trying to find out, what is my calling? What should I be doing? They haven't given real thought to it. They pick up on just little tidbits here and there, and the first thing you know, life passes them by. And let me give you a real-life illustration. I had a friend one time who spoke of a brother in this family, and this brother was about 50 years old, and he was still borrowing money, living money, from his mom and dad, because he never did find something that he really had his heart set on, Now, once we find that, we have to be persistent. We have to stick to it. We have to realize that, yes, there are a lot of things that are going to hinder me along the way. This is the reason that Paul said to Timothy, now, the things that you've been instructed about, stick with them, he said. Stick with them. Why? Because you know where they came from. Well, the church needs a goal like that. The church needs to say, here is our 1-year goal. Here is our 5-year goal. And in some cases, maybe here is our 10-year goal. If churches don't have goals, churches don't go anywhere. If individuals don't have goals, I think you can finish that sentence, can't you? Yeah, we don't go anywhere. So it's very, very important. Now, concerning church, here's something that happens. If churches don't have goals, churches don't grow, and churches don't teach. So what happens? In a generation, it's gone. It's gone. Very, very hard to rebuild it. There's a friend of mine in New Orleans, Louisiana. We were living there. I was preaching for the Carrollton Avenue Church in New Orleans. We were living there at a time when it had a terrible, terrible hurricane. No, it was not Katrina. I mean, it wasn't that bad. It was Hurricane Betsy, which was the worst hurricane they had down there up until that time. There'd been some others that were worse since that time. But one of our deacons, and he and his wife and his children, 2 children, they lived in an area called Carolyn Park. Carolyn Park was right close to the Mississippi River, and Carolyn Park was kind of on a low area. Well, flood came, levees broke, and this whole area was flooded. They got up on their roof, and someone rescued them in a little boat, came and got them. And that was the only way they were saved from that terrible, terrible flood. What is all of this? Persistence caused them to go back and rebuild. They came over to our house and they stayed with us until the water went down. And then one day, this fellow's name was Hugh White, Hugh and June White. Hugh said to me, Jack, we've got to go back. The water's down and they'll let us back in. Now we've got to go see what our house looks like. And they stood there and looked at that house. The water was all gone. But it was marks on the house about 8 feet up for the water, watermark and so forth. And we went inside the house, and it was muddy from head to toe. Everything was lost. Everything was lost. They had to rebuild the inside and all of that. And Hugh and Jean White stood there looking at their house with their arms around each other. And they said, we're going to rebuild. And that's what they did. They rebuilt. It's difficult to rebuild. Let me give you a contrast to this. When Betty and I lived in Tampa, Florida, we found a little place that we could buy a house. It would be our first house we'd ever bought. And I'll tell you what it cost. This will kill you. It was a 3-bedroom house right close to the Hillsborough River, one lot off of the Hillsborough River. That house cost us $10,150. Okay? $10,150. Well, we really had to dig to do this, but we bought that house. And it was in the plan stage. And we went out there and watched them as the walls went up and all of this. And we stood there just literally thrilled, because we're getting our house built. And I've thought about, it's so much easier to build initially than it is to rebuild. Churches, people, individuals, businesses, organizations of all kinds, when they fail and they have to rebuild, folks, sometimes it is misery. There's a thrill to building in the beginning. So plan your life so that you are willing to make the sacrifices of persistence that will help you to build a life from the very beginning and not have to come back and rebuild. Well, Paul was a man who ran up against a whole lot of these problems. In the 2 Corinthian letter, he says, I want to tell you something about myself. He says, I've been in all kind of perils. I've been in perils of the country. I've been in perils of the city. He says, I've been beaten. I've been in prison. I've been accused. I've been abused. I've had all of these terrible, terrible things happen to me. And besides that, I'm just so worried about churches everywhere. But that's in the book of 2 Corinthians. Over in the book of Romans, he tells you why. Why, not in connection with this, but you can see something about what was in Paul's mind all along as he was going along here. He said in Romans, writing to the Jewish Christians, he said, my heart's desire and my prayer to God is that you be saved. My heart's desire. That's the reason Paul was willing to undergo all of these perils and all of these problems and all of these troubles. You see, whatever is your heart's desire, if it really is your heart's desire, whatever that is, you will probably be more willing to be persistent at that than anything else. Can I give a personal thing here? I remember when Betty and I first started dating each other. And let me tell you something, folks. My heart's desire was to marry that lady. And I was persistent. Well, fortunately, she had her heart's desire too, and it was headed in my direction. But when you're in love with someone and you want to woo that person and bring that person to you, there are all kinds of sacrifices you're willing to make. There are all kinds of things you're willing to do. Why? Because that's my heart's desire. And so Paul talks about the fact that his heart's desire was that those people should be saved. And so when he spent his life And he's almost ready to die. He knew it. As a matter of fact, in the latter part of this very letter that we're talking about, he said to Timothy, he said, the time of my departure has come. I've fought the good fight. I've finished my course. I've kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me in that day, and not to me only, but to all who have loved his appearing. Well, what does this say? He says to Timothy, Timothy, continue in the things that you've been taught, because you know the ones from whom you received this teaching. And then he says, I fought a good fight, finished my course, I've kept my faith. Paul then was a person of great persistence. He was a man who knew the virtue of such a wonderful heritage as the Lord Jesus Christ had given to him. Now, God gives to each of us, this is a repeat of part of what I said this morning, but God has given to each of us a responsibility. A responsibility basically that says, I am to live for him. Now, what am I going to do with that responsibility? I'm going to do something like continue in what you have learned and what you have firmly believed, knowing from whom you learned it. It's so important that we keep in mind all of these things that Paul wrote to us about persistence. Abraham Lincoln was one of the most outstanding, maybe the most outstanding president that our country has ever had. And it was only, well, it was a little less than 150 years ago when he made this immortal Gettysburg Address. It's kind of interesting to me that Lincoln didn't think too much of that Gettysburg Address at the time that he wrote it, because he incorporated a statement in there that's completely untrue. What was that statement? Anybody know? The world will little note or long remember what we say here. Oh, brother, the world remembers what he said. Why? Because he said it out of such a full heart. He had been so persistent. He had been criticized. Everything had gone wrong. The country was in the throes of the worst war that it's ever had, and everything was wrong, and he was criticized by his friends, criticized by his enemies, all sorts of things like this. But he knew where he was going. He would not allow any of those things to keep his mind away from the goals that he had set. Citizen hated citizen during that time. Sometime brother hated brother. Sometime father hated son. This was such a divisive thing. And now Abraham Lincoln stood in the place of responsibility to try and bring unity out of such terrible division that was present in this country. I think it's so sad that he was assassinated because of the things that he stood for. But you see, persistence is one of the things that made Lincoln such a great man. We can sometimes take a bad thing, even an embarrassing thing, and make something good out of it. I read a story. I'm going to tell you this story, and I realized that there are some people who said that this was really not true. And the things that I read about the story, I'm not sure whether it's true or not. So I want to give you that information right up front, okay? The great Polish pianist, Petruski, he was scheduled to have a concert in big auditorium. And there was a lady there with her little 9-year-old boy, and the concert was delayed, and they were sitting there, and everybody was kind of fidgety and all of this, and the little boy was irritated, and they were sitting right up close to the front there, and the first thing you know, the lady looks around, she couldn't find her little boy, and then all of a sudden she sees the little boy walk out on the stage, and he sat down at this piano, and he started playing chopsticks on the piano. And some of the people in the audience were so irritated, they shouted at him, "Get this kid off the stage," and all this sort of thing. But Trixie heard what was going on backstage, and he saw the little boy up there playing chopsticks. He came out, and he stood behind the little boy, and he improvised a beautiful, beautiful tune. And the little boy was playing chopsticks. It blended right in to what the little boy was playing. And he whispered in the little boy's ears. He said, "Son, keep going. Don't stop. Don't quit. Don't stop. Don't stop. Don't stop." Well, the whole idea is that sometimes with the help of somebody else, we can take a bad situation, an embarrassing situation, and something good can come out of it. Or the reverse of that. We can find somebody who is having a difficult time with life, a difficult time with their problems, and we sit back and talk about what bad people they are, or how negligent they are, or how dumb they are. We talk about all kinds of things about them, or we can help them. We can help them. This pianist could have come out of there and said, "Get out of this place. You don't belong here." And the audience would probably have applauded him. But he helped. And the audience admired him. They didn't just applaud him, they admired him for that. Well, many years before that, about 900 years ago, Paul stood with a group of elders from the Ephesian church. And in the 20th chapter of Acts, it gives us this story. They were standing there on a sandy beach in a little place called Miletus. And Paul made the statement to them, said, I know you will not see me again. Well, the fact was they probably did see him again, according to the things that are written there in 1 Timothy. But he anticipated that they would never see him again. And they wept together and prayed together. And they parted company. Before Paul left, he warned them. He said, "Now I know that after I leave, there are going to be grievous wolves come in. And even from among you, there's going to be men teaching false doctrine, false things." I can see these men saying, "Paul, it'll never happen here. It'll just never happen here." I know that may happen some other places, but it's just simply not going to happen here. But when you sit down and read the book of Ephesians, the 2nd chapter of Ephesians, you find out it happened. In writing the letter to the church at Ephesus, we find that the Lord says, "Ephesian people, I have this against you. You have left your first love." You see, when people are not persistent, it hurts everybody. I want to close with a story that I think probably you have heard before, or maybe you saw the movie. Years ago, a movie came out by the name of Rudy. You remember that movie? Rudy made a great impression on me. Let me just review a few things about Rudy as I can remember them. Probably some of them are mistaken. But Rudy was a little boy. In school, he wanted to play sports, but he was not very good. And so he was never chosen on the team. When he got to junior high school, he wanted to play on the football team, but he was not good enough to make the team. And when he got to high school, he went out for the football at high school. And he used to tell his dad, I want to go to Notre Dame. I want to play football for Notre Dame and come running out on the field, and bust through that paper football and all the stuff that goes with that. And he said, I want to play football in high school. And he went out for the team, and he didn't make the team. All he could do was be part of the practice squad. That's brutal. That's really brutal, because the varsity just tears you up, and the varsity just uses the practice squad, as a guy. They're the bumpers, and but he stuck with it. He was so determined he's going to play football, but he never did dress out for a game. He applied to Notre Dame. They turned him down. He got on a bus and rode to South Bend, Indiana, to see if he could talk them into accepting him at Notre Dame. And they said no, they couldn't accept him. And the counselor said, why don't you try applying to Holy Cross? It's a sister institution, and they may be able to they may be able to give you to allow you in. Their standards are not quite as high as ours. He went over there, and surely enough, he was accepted at Holy Cross. Holy Cross was not a big football team or anything like that, but he tried to play football on the practice squad, never on the regular squad. At the end of every semester, he would go back to Notre Dame and reapply, and they kept saying no. In his junior year, he came back, and they finally said, okay, we'll let you in Notre Dame. Well, he was thrilled to death. He went out for football, but he didn't make the team. Again, he made the practice squad. They beat up on him. They pushed him around. They blocked him hard, but he always got up. He always got up. And by the way, this is a true story, too. He always got up. And the players on the varsity, began to admire him. And in his senior year, his last chance, he went out for football again. He didn't make it. On the practice squad again. He was there for every practice session. He didn't care how hard they beat up on him or how bruised he came out. He wanted to play football. All year long. He never even got to put on the uniform. He never dressed out for a game. The last game came up. The team, the varsity, by this time admired this guy who had very little talent because of his persistence. And so the captain of the team and some of the important players, they went into the coach and said, Coach, we want you to let Rudy dress out for this last game. And the coach said, no, we can't do that. The captain took off his helmet and he put it on the desk of the coach. And he said, if Rudy can't play, then I'm not going to play. And there were others there of the first team took their helmets and laid them down and said the same thing. The coach said, well, okay. I'll let him dress out. I don't guarantee you that he'll play. I will let him dress out. Well, he dressed out. And, the time came and the team came running in on the field and burst through that big paper football and all that, and the crowd cheered and all, and there was Rudy. He was right there with them, and he sat on the bench the whole time. Notre Dame was a little bit ahead the last quarter. In the last few minutes of the quarter, Rudy still hadn't played. And there were some people in the stands who knew the story of Rudy, and they just started chanting, Rudy, 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 and it picked up from a whole lot of others, and the team joined in, and everybody was demanding that Rudy play. And so finally, on the last play of the game, the coach sent him in. He was playing guard. The coach sent him in, and everybody cheered. Well, on that last play, the other team had the ball, but on that last play, the play came right over the left guard. Rudy made the tackle. The whistle blew, and the game was over. And the team went to Rudy, and they picked him up, put him on their shoulders, and marched off the field like Rudy was their hero. Well, in the movie, a little byline came by that was very important. And that byline said, up until that time, no Notre Dame player has ever been carried off the field on the shoulders of his teammate. Persistence. Even when things are bad, persistence. Seeing it through, working on it, demanding of yourself that you succeed, that you accomplish what you set out to do. Well, Rudy, I think, is a great inspiration along this line. And there are so many people through the history of the world, and particularly through the history of the Bible, people who had all kinds of bad things turning against them. But because they were persistent, they succeeded. Maybe they didn't accomplish all that they set out to accomplish. But remember what Arthur Stone said. They accomplished part of what their noble goal had originally been. That's persistence. We're going to sing an invitation song. If you're not a Christian tonight and you want to become a Christian, this is the time. This is the time to respond to the Lord's invitation. Be baptized into Christ. I'm going to ask that we stand together now while we sing.